Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week, we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, the host of the podcast, and Hunter is with me today. H, welcome.
Autumn, it's good to be back. Just the familiar ring of your little liturgical now introduction to the Vision for Life podcast. It just soothes my soul.
I'm so glad to hear it. Yeah. I'm really glad to have you back. And you had joked before your sabbatical that you would have to see whether or not continuing as a regular guest on the podcast would make the cut of the work that you continued. And here you are.
I did a lot of sorting through what should I pick back up, what should I not pick back up.
Some soul searching.
Yeah, and I'm picking it back up.
Well, we're glad to have you back. And I asked you if today we could talk about your sabbatical. None of us got to take 3 months off with you, but we would like to live vicariously through you.
Well, you had a sabbatical not too long ago, and
it's true.
And we did a re-entry, what did you learn on sabbatical episode, and I thought it was fantastic. It actually helped me a ton to think about my own sabbatical that was coming up. So I guess we'll put that out there for any of our listeners who are soon going to themselves be on sabbatical.
I think what we're going to try to do is to make this conversation helpful and applicable, whether or not someone is actually going to be able to take 3 months off of work.
Good.
Well, we did have a conversation that aired at the beginning of May before you left. And in that conversation, you were thinking, it was before you left on sabbatical. So you were thinking about sabbatical, anticipating what might happen. You already knew your basic schedule and shared some of that. So the things you were going to do, but you were also anticipating sort of the aspect of sabbatical that is restful and gives you an opportunity to engage with some different books, different places than you do just in the normal course of life when you don't have an extended time off. So I would love to pull some of the things that we talked about in that conversation into our conversation today and to hear what you did, some of what you learned, whatever you would like to share about your time with God and how you did experience that renewal and hopefully some clarity of vision. That is what one of the purposes of sabbatical is.
Yeah, a few minutes ago when we were talking about this, you said, now, you had 3 themes for your sabbatical.
You did.
And I was like, what were those 3 themes? And
you identified them very clearly.
Yes, and then you read them back to me, and I was like, oh, yeah, I did those 3 things.
Well, I framed up my questions today around those 3 themes. So I'm hoping that you at least, that those themes did factor into your sabbatical so that we can talk about them today. But the things that you had identified in that conversation, the themes that I reminded you of a moment ago, were time with friends and family, renewed vision, and creativity. But first, I want to hear a little bit just about your sabbatical. Part of what the intent of sabbatical is for rest, renewal, a time to step away, spend extended time with God, and as we mentioned, with friends and family. But on the theme just of rest and renewal, tell us a little bit about what you did and what was life-giving about your time away.
My time away was really divided into 2 big chunks. The first 2 months and the third month. The first 2 months, I traveled a lot. And to some different places, but had a lot of trips, times with friends and family. And I was only home 2 or 3, maybe 4 days at a time, max. For those first 2 months, I was not home on a weekend at all. So I would be going to church wherever I happened to be at the time, but it wasn't here in Denver. And so those were the first 2 months. And those are distinct because, in my mind anyway, because my experience was, because I'm away from home and I'm engaged in fun things with friends and family, I'm like fully disconnected from thinking about life back here. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not spending time with the Lord, doesn't mean He's not occasionally bringing things to mind about ministry, but I'm really, really, like, mentally, I feel about as unplugged in a good way as I've ever felt. Now, the last month was mostly spent at home. I did have a quick trip for a family reunion at the end of July, but a lot of it was spent here in town. And that month I began to kind of look back or refocus on what do I envision for the next 10 to 15 years of life in here in Denver, ministry in the church, for my own self vocationally, and gave a lot more time to collecting my thoughts and synthesizing some of what the Lord was giving me. And it was easier to do that because I'm in the space where I live. And so you're just kind of starting to feel those normal life rhythms a little bit more clearly. So that's kind of the breakdown of the sabbatical.
Mm-hmm. In those first couple of months when you spent a lot of time away and spent some extended time with friends and family, how did that theme that you identified, time with friends and family, how did that factor in? But also, how did that maybe look a little bit different during sabbatical as opposed to you take trips to see family and friends, during the normal course of a year. So how was your time and that ability to spend some extended time kind of unique or special during your sabbatical?
Well, one way was I was able just to say yes to things that I might not have been able to say yes to or not as easily have said yes to. So, for example, I spent a few days going to see my oldest nephew graduate from high school and then went and saw, he's in Savannah, Georgia, then saw some friends who were in South Georgia. And, it was just like, hey, I can say yes to all of that because I don't have to scramble right back for something at home. So that was really, really fun to be with my brothers, to be my brother whose son graduated. He had both sides of his family were there to help celebrate. So it was really, really fun to be with my sister-in-law's family again. Mm-hmm. I had not seen them, probably most of them since their wedding. And it was almost like an extended family get together. And that was fantastic. So I was able to say yes to things like that. Mm-hmm. And really in those space, the priority is like, what are we doing together? Now, there's plenty of downtime. So I have time to read. I have time to spend with the Lord. I have time to work on some creative things. But that was not the first priority. That's like, I'm going to wedge that in kind of into the cracks when I have some time. First priority is just being with those folks and to be just mentally free to be present with the people you're with is really fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It is a gift to, as you said, be able to prioritize that, to say the reason I'm here is to spend this time with my friends and family. You also spent some time with friends of yours, but with some of our ministry partners.
That's right.
So I think, were you mostly in France, in Paris?
I spent about 3.5 weeks in France. Mm-hmm. I actually went to France just for a few days on the front end of the sabbatical as part of an Acts 29 vision trip. We went on from Paris to Dublin, and we spent about a week in Dublin visiting with church planters there. That was the very first thing I did on sabbatical, and actually that trip was planned before my sabbatical. So it's kind of, feels a little worky because it's related to church mm-hmm. planting, but it was really good to see what the Lord is doing in a couple of big cities that are part of the Western world, but not in America. And there's some parallel themes to what I see happening here at home. And so that was really helpful to reflect on. And then I came back home, did what I just described, time with my family, and then went back to France for 3.5 weeks. And I was several different places in France, but was in and out of Paris several times. We have a ministry partner, Église de Montagne, is launching September 14th, a church plant that we're partnered with in central Paris. And Philip Moore, who preached at Fellowship this summer. Philip is a good friend and actually got to strengthen and deepen that friendship by, basically just making his house my house. They might have been sick at me at one point. There was at one point where I was like staying at his house and he had some more guests coming in town, and it's a flat in the middle of Paris. It's a 3-bedroom flat, but it's not huge. And I was like, Philip, I'm going to get a hotel room and just let you have your house back for a few nights. But I house sat for him while he was out of town. He and his family were out of town. So I house sat and walked the dog and kind of got the local treatment at the bakery, because I had the dog. The dog everyone knows. Everyone in that little neighborhood knows Alfie the dog. So then they pretended like they knew me, welcomed me into their community, even though I didn't parler very much français, but it was really fun.
Yeah,
so
that
I
sounds
kind of live like a
delightful.
local in Paris. That was a good week of just creativity, and spent some more time with friends in different parts of France.
Was that when, I think in a different conversation we had when I was just asking you about your trip, you said one of the best sermons, or one of the sermons that really stuck with you, was from your time in France. Was that during this day?
Yes, that was. One of the Sundays that I was in Paris, I worshiped with another of our Acts 29 church plants that's 10 years old now. And for our listeners who are familiar with Paris, it's near the République area of Paris, which is on the right bank. It is a very young area of Paris. A lot of multicultural young people from all over the world live in that part of Paris. It's right in central Paris, and it tends to attract that crowd. And this church has been very strategic about always meeting and gathering. They've had several different gathering spaces like church plants do, but they've been very intentional about being close to where a lot of the metro lines and then the regional train lines come together, so that they can connect people from across the city. And the name of the church is Connection Church, Église Connexion, Connection Church. And they're doing fantastic. They were planted 10 years ago, 200 to 300 people, which is a huge church in Paris. We are wedged like sardines into this storefront area. And the pastor, in fact, not the Sunday I was attending, the lead pastor was not preaching, but like their teaching pastor was preaching in, and he gave a fantastic sermon. Fortunately, he makes an announcement right before his sermon, which is, if you are primarily an English speaker and you need an English transcript of this sermon, go to egleseconnexion.com/English. And I was like, I'm going to actually get to join the sermon today, And so, and I know enough French that I could actually follow the sermon. I could listen to what he was saying and go, oh, you're right here. And he gave a fantastic exposition from the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus says, whoever would come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And he titled the sermon, "When Are You Going to Lose Your Life?" And it's an intentionally pointed and provocative way of making the main point of that passage, which is everyone's going to lose their life. You're either going to lose it in judgment when you've lived for yourself and now your life is judged, or you're going to lose it in surrendering to the lordship of Jesus, and you're going to get salvation in return for that, So when are you going to lose your life? And he makes the point that a lot of us, when we first sign up to believe in Jesus or follow Jesus, we don't quite realize that this is the arrangement. He is now the Lord. We are not in control of our life. He gets to run our life, and Jesus has ways, because he's sovereign. He has ways as we go through life of helping us realize this is the arrangement. And it was a word that I needed to hear even just that week. Some things I've maybe been wrestling with that week that I need to hear that week. And it was it's a timeless message, because it is just true of our whole lives. And the sermon was so well crafted and well put together. In fact, he almost like he anticipated the next question people were going to ask, and then he answered it. It was very skillful preaching. So it was fantastic. And maybe we'll post in the show notes a link to that manuscript, which is that transcript, the English transcript.
Definitely.
Still out there.
Do that. Yeah. As you've been sharing your various experiences with your family, spending time with Philip and his wife Rachel in Paris, and then spending time with these different church plants there, I was just enjoying that description, because in this theme of time with friends and family, we would think of that in the classic sense. You would go see people who you know and love, and time with family as well, time with your family, being able to see your nephew graduate and celebrate with him. All of those things are so good. But then in this description, you also spent time with the family of God.
That's
just
right.
In different places, wherever you were on that Sunday, being able to attend different churches. And I think that also just enriches your sabbatical time, this opportunity to take some time away and worship with different family around the globe, really, in your time on sabbatical. But I'm so glad that that was part of your time away also.
My family in Savannah goes to an Anglican church, like an evangelical Anglican church. In fact, it is the oldest it's the oldest church in Georgia. It's the first church in Georgia. In their history, John Wesley and George Whitefield have both been the pastors, senior pastors, of the church.
That's remarkable.
They lost their building a few years ago because they disassociated from the Episcopal Church over sexuality issues and being committed to orthodoxy. And so they lost their building, and they're meeting in a different building, but they have this rich legacy. And going to church there in the Anglican tradition, they are celebrating the season of Epiphany and the sending of the Spirit. And I was or Pentecost, sorry, and the sending of the Spirit, and I was just so encouraged by the celebration of the fact that the Spirit of God is with us, and the mission of God is moving forward. And they were talking about that. So that was really fun. And I may have gotten the liturgical tradition wrong. I'm such a low church Protestant. But anyway, that was really moving. And I should probably mention that Sunday that I heard this sermon in Paris, I really wrestled with, do I even go to church today? I was by myself in the city because I was house sitting, and I had some friends from the States who were passing through, as people do. They pass through Paris for a couple of days in a row, and we were going to have dinner that night. And so I had that coming, and of course you're in Paris, so there's endless number of fun things that you could do or go see. And I just had this thought, I kind of want to go see this church, but I don't know. It's going to be in French. I won't understand what's going on. Will it really matter if I go? That's not going to be spiritually significant. And I convinced myself to go because I thought, well, I know the pastor there, and it'll be encouraging to him if I come and say, hey, man, it's so exciting to see your church. I'll go and just encourage this pastor. And, to my surprise, they have an English transcript of the sermon, and it's like a pointed word that I need. And it was just like this reminder, like, don't ever short circuit the power of obeying what you know is good, even when you don't feel like it, because you'll miss out. I would have missed out on one of the clearest words the Lord gave me. I would have missed out on one of the clearest words from the Spirit that I got during sabbatical if I had not just gone and done something that I was kind of only half excited to go and do, but that you kind of know in your mind is the right thing to do. So there's a lesson right there that I needed to.
Definitely. I think that's a lesson that we need continuously. Yes, to do that thing that we know is good, even when we don't feel like it. On the second theme that you mentioned, Hunter, which was renewed vision or renewal of vision, that you identified before your sabbatical. First of all, I'm curious how you were thinking about that. Maybe if you can call to mind, what were you thinking pre-sabbatical when you said, this is one of the themes that I really am hoping for during my sabbatical?
Well, I made some goals for things I wanted to get done on sabbatical, not in a productive sense. I mean, a couple of them had a productive element to it, like I want to produce this. But I just needed, if you give me 3 months, I need to have some targets to aim at. And it's much more like sailing an old ship where you've got to kind of put the sails up and go as the wind is going, and you've got to adjust the sails according to what the wind is doing, and you kind of know the point that you're going to go, but you don't know the exact route to get there, so you're kind of tacking, to those routes as you go, and you're navigating that way. That's kind of what I want to do. I just want to plot some points out here, and I want to navigate toward those, so that when I get to the end of 3 months, I won't just look at it and go, what do I have to show for this time? I want something to show for this time. And one of the things I wanted to produce 2 documents that are just for me. They're just working documents. They're not, they're not public documents. I'm not going to present them. They're just for my sake, that I can pull up and I can look at. And one of them I called a personal vocational vision for the next 10 to 15 years of my life. And the other one I called a vision for the direction I would want to lead the church, if the Lord allows, for the next 10 plus years. And I wanted to know those 2 things. So one is personal, one is more focused on the church. And I had a mentor who said to me in a couple months leading up to sabbatical, he said, there's certain seasons of life where you can see different distances ahead and different seasons of life. I think I might have shared this on our pre-sabbatical episode. And some seasons of life you can literally just see 6 months ahead, or you can just see, maybe you can see the next year, and you can kind of know this what's coming the next year. And then sometimes you kind of crest hills and you can see further ahead. So I've had this realization really for the last year that I can remember where I was when I turned 40 years old, and then I had a 50th birthday, and I can think about 10 years went by fast in some sense, but a lot happened in those 10 years. And the Lord let me do a lot in those 10 years. So you have a lot of perspective on, what's possible for 10 years. It's more than you kind of imagine before it starts. And our church is 19 years old, so I know what 10 years of church life or 15 years of church life feels like. And so it's one of those seasons where I can actually imagine what 10-year kind of directions would be in a way that I couldn't have even 10 years ago. So I wanted to capture some of that. I've been thinking a lot about that, and I wanted to have time to synthesize that and to capture that. So those are I've said, hey, here's 2 sabbatical goals. One working document. What is your vision for your vocational vision for your life for the next 10 to 15 years? And then what is it for the church? So I did those.
On that second theme that you just shared, the thinking about the church over the course of the coming 10 years, what aspects of the church's ministry or mission did you think about, or perhaps what became clearer to you during that time?
The biggest aha, and it was nothing that became really clear to me, was something I hadn't thought about before. In fact, the value of the sabbatical space, and even the way it kind of worked out, I had those 2 months kind of away that I mentioned, and during those 2 months, I would keep a little journal and some notes. So when something would come to mind, or I would get something like I got at the church service, or be reading something that spoke to me, I would just try to capture it, but I didn't try to synthesize it. Just tried to get it down so I could refer to it later. And then at the end of those 2 months, when I was back home and thinking a little bit more about what's going on at home, I sat down to start collecting those 2 documents, those 2 working documents. And there was nothing in those 2 documents that I'd never thought about before. There was no
nothing brand new.
Nothing brand new. No, aha, never thought about that. That's the thing that's the golden thread, epiphany, none of that. But what there was clarity about what's most important, or you might say what's most pressing in my heart, and what I feel like is also most pressing as I compare what's I'm burdened by with what the Lord says I should be burdened by. And I was able to talk about that with some friends, and so the benefit is of being disconnected for 2 months is this: if you've been thinking about 30 things, if there's 30 things that have been occupying your mind, at the end of those 2 months, when you kind of pick it all back up, there's nothing new there, but it is pretty obvious what the 1 or 2 biggest themes are. And that was the aha. It was being able to go, oh, that's the big thing That's the big destination that I really want to, track toward. Those are a couple of the big destinations that I really want to track toward. And all these other things I've been thinking about are good and important, but this is really the big one. So yeah.
Yeah. Would you be willing to
Yeah.
share what was that? What is that thing for, as it relates to fellowship in particular?
As it relates to our church, this is what became so clear to me in a way that it hadn't before. And I started typing all this out. We planted Fellowship Denver 19 years ago. And when we planted Fellowship Denver, I think when we had our first service, I was 32 years old. And pretty much for the first 10 years, our whole church was in their 20s. It's like I'm just like, they're like my little brothers and my little sisters, and that was a time when the millennial generation, as it was called, was really a cultural phenomenon. Mm-hmm. People are talking about the millennials, for sometimes kind of with scoffing, but I intuitively just understood these people. I knew, and I would get to know them, and I would hear about their stories of faith, and I would understand where they had come from. And so we, and Dave Moreland, who planted the church with me, same, very attuned to the millennials. And so we planted and we grew a church that was really dialed into the discipleship needs of the millennials. And then I had this aha moment. We have literally seen Jesus' parable of the soils play out among that generation. And the parable of the soils, where Jesus says, the seed is scattered and some falls on rocky ground and it's blown away. And some sprouts up and has produces for just a little while. And then the cares of the world and the cares of life cause the seed to be choked out and it's fruitless. And some bears fruit, and multiplies. And I thought, man, I can see that. I've watched it play out for a generation of people. And I've sadly watched people's faith get choked out by cares and concerns of the world, by ideologies of the world, by foolish relationships that they've had in the world. I've shared the gospel with people who have been unresponsive, and are curious for just a little bit and then just disappeared. And I have seen people in their 20s who are immature in so many ways become like rock solid men and women who love the Lord and are bearing good fruit. Mm-hmm. I've seen all of that happen. And today, that generation is still, I would guess if you map Fellowship Denver, they're still like the majority generation in our church. They're just now in their 30s and 40s. Mm-hmm. Some of them are older singles. Some of them are married, having children, navigating issues of marriage and parenting. And they have the kind of discipleship needs that you start having in your 30s and your 40s, which are different than in your 20s, and they kind of have midlife questions. And I've been through that. I'm 10 years ahead. So anyway, it was really eye-opening to go. Our church planted and reached that generation, very effective, I think, very fruitful with that generation, seen the parable of the soils play out. We know there's some in that generation who need to be called back to faith in Christ, and their story hopefully is not over, but they're not walking with the Lord today. And there's some who are walking with the Lord and bearing good fruit, and discipleship for them now looks like taking on more leadership, taking on more responsibility, navigating the questions you have to navigate in midlife, making the adjustments they need to make in their marriage and in parenting in order to keep going. So, and then I saw there's another generation coming behind them. It's often called Gen Z now. Mm-hmm. They're in their 20s. And we need to make sure that as a church, we are also learning and fleshing out the gospel and discipleship for that generation. And I've watched a lot of churches do this. They're planted in one generation. They are fruitful in that generation. And then they just become a single generational church, basically. Mm-hmm. And it's not it's not because they don't want to reach younger people. It's not because they aren't
because
trying.
They don't care.
They don't care. It's not. It's not that. It's just that the gravitational pull of the church is for the people that are already there. That's always the way churches work. The gravitational pull is for the people who are already there, and so there needs to be really a broadening of our culture as a church to now not dismiss the millennials, but to keep discipling them in this stage of life they're in, but to broaden the cultural center where the questions and the preferences of the next generation are also being factored into who we are as a church and how we're doing ministry. And that's been on my heart for a couple of years now, but that as the big directional leadership challenge for me personally, and how I want to lead Fellowship Denver, just became crystal clear in this time away. And it's exciting what the Lord is doing among Gen Z, and part of this came from seeing in other parts of the world. This church plant in Paris that Philip Moore is planting, I got to sit in with the core group that's launching that. Mm-hmm. Got to sit in with them a couple of times. Wedged, about 50, 20-something-year-olds wedged into a flat, in the middle of Paris. And they are evangelistic. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was non-believers at the meetings I was at. And I would, they would give me 5 minutes to share a little something about Jesus or discipleship. And then I would be having conversations with non-Christians afterwards. Mm-hmm. So I am so hopeful for that church plant. The Lord, the Spirit of God seems to be doing something among Generation Z across the Western world. I saw it in Dublin too, and I don't know exactly how to describe it. Some have called it the quiet revival. I think I would describe it like this: they are skeptical of secularism, and maybe this might be the main difference between the millennial generation and Gen Z. The millennials were a little bit more skeptical of Christianity and kind of drawn or curious about secularism. A lot of Gen Z tends to be a little bit more jaded on secularism and curious or drawn toward Christianity. So like with millennials, you had to take certain apologetic questions in mind because these are the questions they're asking about the faith. Gen Z is asking different questions. They're not quite as skeptical. They also are not nearly as grounded in just the very, very basics of like Christian theology and Christian life as the millennials were. So they need more like explanation of like, here's the basics, And when you do that, they're like, this is amazing. Thank you, And so in a way that millennials would have kind of just rolled their eyes and go like, yeah, that's so basic. We already get that, So these are just slight differences. Both generations have grown up in a secular or highly secularized or secularizing culture. So that's similar, but their attitudes and dispositions are a little different. And there just seems to be an openness, spiritual curiosity and openness among Gen Z that is, I think, refreshing and good for the church and fun to think about. How do we tune into that?
Yeah. So this vision that was renewed and clarified for you during this time was that Fellowship would become a multi-generational church, that we would be able to actively, wisely, in a culturally savvy way, engage Gen Z and see these questions that they're asking.
That's
invite
right.
them in and have this evangelistic and welcoming bent towards them, towards this younger generation.
And just do the same thing we did for millennials. But also factor in the way that Gen Z's questions and dispositions might be a little bit different. So that's my main kind of thing for ministry coming out. Now the good thing is we have a vibrant group of 20-somethings in the life of our church. So it's not like we're trying to go do something that we've got no fruit in, It's just leaning more heavily into that and putting this lens on everything we do. Like we really need to make sure that we're encouraging those folks.
Yeah. I have one follow-up question before we move on to talking about your third theme of creativity. But on this topic, I can remember when we started attending fellowship, the church officially began meetings in the fall of 2006. And my husband and I started attending in 2007. So just a few months later. And we were in our 20s at the time. We were already married and had our first kiddo, who was just a few months old, also when we started attending. But we were in our 20s. And as you said, you and Dave were in your early 30s. And so you had this natural kind of attunement to the questions that the millennial generation was asking and to their values. And as church plants go, then, as you mentioned, fellowship attracted many, many people in their 20s. But you didn't only have a natural sort of attunement to it. You and Dave both, before you began meetings, when you decided to plant a church in Denver, put a lot of work into understanding Denver, our cultural context, and into understanding the people who you were reaching. And so I think the follow-up question is, I love when hearing you describe this clarified vision. And I often get to work with the exact people you're describing, whether they're volunteers in our kids ministry or through our intern program. So I love this vision of reaching more of Gen Z and realizing that God is doing some sort of work in the Western world in that age group, in the 18 to 30-year-old age group, and being mindful of that and seeing where the Spirit is working. But I wonder also, you said we need to put this lens on what we're doing. So how do we go about growing that kind of cultural attunement? How do we put that lens on what it is that we're doing as a church in the various ways that we go about ministry? So what we teach, what we cover or talk about when we gather, how it is that we organize those gatherings, those sorts of questions. How do we actually do that?
Yeah. Well, you said it right there in your answer, and it is by intentionally spending time with and learning that what those folks are asking and discerning what they need, listening to them and discerning what they need. And we did it with the millennial generation. So it wasn't just like, well, I'm 32 years old. I just intuitively get 20-something-year-olds. There may be a little bit of that, happening, although I'm not very cool. So there's always things that are happening in pop culture that I'm like, what? I've always been an old soul in that sense. So no one has ever mistaken me for being, especially hip or cool or trendy. One of our younger staff members, she's in her 20s, she was, in a very nice way last week, she was like, you kind of, in the way you dress, I mean, you do kind of look older, and I was like, oh, I've dressed this way since I was young. so it's not like I've suddenly started dressing like an old man. I've dressed like an old man since I was 25. So anyway, I've never been terribly intuitively cool. Now, I get to spend time with pastors who are in their 30s and early 40s, and a lot of those guys are way cooler than I am, and they intuitively get the questions, of 20-something-year-olds. But here's where I'm going with this. Our game at Fellowship Denver has always been, we want to spend time with people and understand people. We want to listen well to people. We don't just want to ask them well, what do you need? Tell me what you need, and then we'll just kind of go do it. We want to listen to them through the lens of being shaped and formed by Scripture. And then using the lens God gives us through being shaped and formed by Scripture, we want to, as pastors, intuit what they need and understand and discern. I guess that's the word I'm grasping for, discern what they need. And discern it prayerfully, discern it from the Word, but discern it by listening to them, right? And so we just need to keep doing the work that we already kind of have done, and we need to exercise the old muscles that we've had, and not just settle for, well, we have a big church and we have a lot of people here and there's a lot going on. And that's my main concern for us, is that in the stability, in the size, in the busyness of ministry, in the comfort of all that's already going on, the good programs, the good ministries that are already being done, we could just say this is good enough, and not do the work of spending time with and listening to and prayerfully discerning what the next generation needs. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer. We just got to listen to them and figure it out.
Yeah, that's a good answer. It's a good answer. All right, I'm going to steer us back to, we're supposed to be talking about your sabbatical.
Okay.
So that was a great discussion. And
well,
now
I thought about that a lot on sabbatical. So we are talking about my sabbatical.
Good. I'm gonna bring us back to this third theme that you had identified before your sabbatical, which was creativity. So you had the time with friends and family, renewed vision, and creativity. And I personally think that having some extended time away from work always allows for more creativity, like the soil in which those creative ideas can be tilled up more easily when you have just extended time to think, when you have a chance for some silence and solitude, especially silence in the way of your mind is not overly full of the things that you have to do or produce. So I wonder if you experienced some of that, and or if you have any specific sorts of ways that you are going to, that began perhaps in your sabbatical, that you're going to continue in having some particular creative outlets as you return.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is yes. I worked on a couple of writing projects that are really I'm really setting myself up. I spent some time in sabbatical setting myself up for those, not just doing a lot of the writing, but more of the setting up to do it. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is I want to identify what the Lord has given to me that he wants me to transfer to other people, and I want to make it transferable. And so I don't want it to just be inside of me and for it just kind of leak out of me every now and then, but I want to be very strategic and intentional about saying, what is it that God has given me that whatever he's given me or taught me, it's especially noteworthy. There's plenty of things I've learned that like no one wants to learn from me. I don't need to teach it. But there are some things that I think I should teach and impart to other people. And there's kind of two audiences in particular, two groups of people I have in mind. One is like probably just the listeners of this podcast, just someone who is a follower of Christ or maybe exploring faith, and they're somewhere on that continuum, of Jesus follower to explorer, and they want a thoughtful approach to faith. What should they be thinking about? I think the Lord's given me a lot in that realm. And then the other one is pastors, and particularly lead pastors, church planters, and lead pastors. And I do think the role of lead pastor is a particular gifting and calling that the church needs, and it's a pastor, but it's a pastor with a certain kind of bent or hat. It's not all pastors. And that's good. If all pastors were like lead pastors, the church would be, not be a body. It would just have, maybe big arms or something like that, So not all pastors are called to be lead pastors. So I want to impart vocational vision and for being a pastor and a lead pastor that God's given me. And then I want to impart some things about following Christ, thoughtfully that he's given me. So I've spent a lot of time in the last year or so identifying what those themes are that he's called me to make transferable. And I've been setting up some writing projects to hopefully transfer some of those things. And the beauty of writing is it causes you to have to be clear and to put it on paper and to make it understandable for someone else.
Are there any of these writing projects that you're going to be sharing in such a way that like our church family can
read
absolutely
them? Well, I'm starting a newsletter, a weekly newsletter. that I'm calling Renaissance faith, which sounds kind of bougie. I couldn't come up with a less fluffy title. I was like, I need something a little bit more rugged, But anyway, Renaissance it is. Renaissance faith. But the reason I actually love this idea is I was reading about the Renaissance a few years ago. This is the cultural movement that really was a major strain that contributed to the Reformation. And it wasn't a Christian movement, but it started off by saying, it's the late Middle Ages. They would have called it the modern era. We would now call it the late Middle Ages. But there was this sense, a lot of the culture was Christianized in a lot of ways, but there was just this sense that the way Christianity was being expressed had kind of worn thin. And there was a lot of spiritual malaise. There was a lot of sense that the culture had made a lot of progress, but had somehow lost touch with some of the basics of just being human. And the Renaissance thinkers said, we don't need to innovate a lot of new stuff as much as we need to go back and recover the very best wisdom from the centuries who have gone before us. And then we need to recover it and bring it and use it in the present. So it's not just about studying history, but it's about taking that stuff and bringing it into the present, applying it to modern problems, And the mantra of the Renaissance was ad fontes, to the sources, back to the sources. We need to go back to the sources. And that mindset birthed the Reformation. The reformers took that mindset and they went back to Scripture. That was their big source. And the Renaissance even recovered the Greek New Testament, for example. Instead of the Latin Vulgate, which was commonly used, Erasmus, a Renaissance scholar, produced a very reliable text of the Greek New Testament. And so scholars started reading the Bible again in Greek, and they discovered that a lot of things have become fuzzy that were actually very clear originally. And then they started translating the Bible into the language people actually spoke. No one really spoke Greek, or Latin. So they start translating to the language people do speak, like French and German and English. And they start, and these translations have so much power because they're so much more accurate, and close to what the original said. So people are starting to hear the gospel with fresh ears again. And then the reformers took that and they read Scripture that way. They literally recovered what was in Scripture, and they also really tapped into a couple of the church fathers the first few centuries, especially Augustine, and they tapped into some of what the church fathers wrote and how they understood Scripture, and that's kind of confirmed the way they were understanding it and birthed the Reformation. So anyway, I think this whole mindset of the stuff I really need for faith, for a vibrant lifetime of faith, has already been discovered. And I just need to rediscover it. And then kind of the aha I've had is the popular evangelical Christian market that publishes books and podcasts like this is not always bringing us those things. It's not always bringing us those things. So you've got to be a little bit of an explorer and a digger, and you need some guides to point you where to go, because most Christians in America have a faith that is, to an extent they don't even realize, is shaped by the Christian market, such that whatever's trending in the Christian market, if there's a popular author who's really about this, or, I watch ideas kind of get into churches this way. It's like it becomes this, this trending idea, and everyone's starting talking about it. Some of those are good. Don't get me wrong. Some of those are really good, but the point is, there's a lot that we need for vibrant life with Christ that's not trending right now. And there's not a popular book on it. There's good books on it. They're just not popular. They're not selling well. So we need to learn how to find these sources. And the best teachers and mentors I've had have trained me in this kind of stuff. They introduced me to classical sources. They taught me classical habits. And I just thought, I've never really outgrown these things. I've been able to come back to them over and over again. I've never outgrown them, which means I'm not as deep as they are, right? They're deeper than I am. And so I just want to introduce people to those. And so I'm going to be writing about that, what those sources are, in kind of anyone can get their mind around it, and if they want to put it into action, they can. Here's what they can go do something with it, kind of way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that sort of with that sort of bent, and in increments that are able to be read.
That's right.
So I think you said, what's your goal for a typical
That's right.
post?
You and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and I told you I started this newsletter. I think today, as we were recording, I hit publish on the first article.
I got it.
I've banked good. You were my first subscriber.
Yep.
I'm
honored to be your first subscriber.
It's about 3 hours old, and I think I have like 40 subscribers now. But you're always number one.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exciting times.
And but I'm going to write every week, and I've banked up the first few weeks of content of articles, but I'm going to write every week, and my aim is to write about 500 to 800 words. So that's not something that takes too long to read. A lot of people can do it in the bathroom. It's bathroom reading,
It's not like one of those Atlantic articles that you decide you have to switch to the audio for.
That's right. That's
it's like,
right.
Whew, this is an 18-minute listen.
Or
I
that
think
you
I'm
start and never finish. It's not one of those. So yeah, that's going to be, and I'm going to have a theme that I write about every month. So I've got 10 themes. I'm going to write about one a month, and then the next month, kind of change to a different theme. And that doesn't mean I won't occasionally write about other things, but it's focused. It's not like, well, what's on Hunter's mind this week? Well, let me tell you about this. It's not that. It's not field notes. I've got themes I'm going to write on, and I've got a little bit of a plan.
Well, I'm glad that we get to have a glimpse, if we want, of this creative outlet.
That's right. And it's called Renaissance Faith.
Renaissance Faith.
Renaissance Faith.
We can also share the link to it in the notes, so that if anyone does want to subscribe, our listeners are welcome to. So last question, Hunter. As you're coming back, returning to fellowship after these months away, but stepping back into your role, not only your work here, but your pastoral role, and taking back up ministerial work. How are you feeling about this next season? So you mentioned the next 10 years at fellowship. So now coming back with this time away to rest, reflect, spend time with other people. As you're coming back in, what are you anticipating and what are you excited about as you look ahead?
Well, I'm excited about things we just talked about and going after those. I will say I've been back a little over a week into my daily work, and it's been a good reminder that the daily grind can often cause you to lose sight of the big picture. I mean, I can feel the busyness. Last week was my first week in the office, and it felt like my first week of work ever. I can remember my first week in the accounting firm, just coming home every day, in my suit and tie, just couldn't wait to get out of my uncomfortable clothes. And I was just exhausted. And I was like, how do adults do this? And I've kind of felt that way this last week. How do adults do this? I've not had this rigorous of a schedule, for the last 3 months, and I'm a little bit out of shape. But the other thing is, like, stuff comes at us fast. Messages pile up fast. We are bombarded with messages. We are bombarded with requests. There's a lot to think about, and it can be easy in the grind of that to lose sight of the big picture. So, if anything, I'm resolved to give myself more time and space to step back and look at the big picture and be reminded of the big picture. It's one of the reasons I wanted to write those 2 working documents. I wanted to write them for myself so that when I get a little overwhelmed or I've lost sight of the big picture, I can come back and go like, oh, that's where we're trying to go. That's what I'm trying to do. And say no to certain things that I need to say no to, and that are good things that just distract from the big picture. So I'm excited about the big picture, and I'm nervous about all the just the normal busyness of life.
Yes, there is this distinct feeling of, how did I do all of this and everything that I'm still doing to continue on in my normal life?
There is, and I've been intentional about, you don't have to just pick everything right back up the exact same way you picked it up. So I'm trying to slow roll, picking things back up. But yeah, I want want to keep the big themes God has called me to in mind.
Well, we're very glad to have you back. So glad you had a sabbatical. Thankful for our conversation today, and really glad that you're back here at Fellowship with us, where we get to see you on a regular basis.
I'm glad to be back.
And for those of you listening, this episode is sitting right at the beginning of our season 5 of Vision for Life podcast. We'll share more in the coming weeks of what we'll be talking about this fall. But as always, part of what we hope for through the Vision for Life podcast is that this is a sort of conversation. We say that in our opening. And what that means is we love hearing from you and taking your suggestions and questions into account as we decide what to talk about on the podcast. So please feel free to email us your questions, suggestions, anytime. You can send those to podcast@fellowshipdenver.org. Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Special thanks to Adam Englund for our theme music, to Jesse Cowan, our producer, and to Judd Connell, who provides transcription for these episodes.